Thank you for being here this morning. Those of you that are streaming with us, we're glad you're online with us today. And just wanted to mention, there's some that are outside of our congregation and have been looking in on our services. They were not sure about whether we keep streaming after everything goes back to normal. We've been streaming for years, and so we're going to keep streaming our services. So if you're outside of our congregation or part of our congregation and can't come for whatever reason, you can stream our services at home and participate with us here. We're going to keep doing that on and on. Of course, this is Memorial Day weekend. It's a special time for Americans to stop and remember those who have given their lives on behalf of Americans throughout the generations. Maybe you've seen the post where there's a man, a veteran, standing at the Vietnam Wall. And inside the wall of names, there are deceased veterans looking out at him as he looks into them. And the caption says, "It's Memorial Day for them, it's Veterans Day for him." So in November, we're going to remember all of our veterans and appreciate the willingness of all veterans to put on the uniform and to go into harm's way if necessary for the sake of our country. But Memorial Day remembers those who've given their lives on behalf of America and on behalf of the liberties that we enjoy. We are hopefully remembering as well the early days of why those patriots from generation to generation are willing to go to battle on our behalf. And I want us to think back this morning. I want to talk about the providence of God in the history of America, particularly this morning. I want to tell you a couple of stories that occurred during the American Revolution that depicted the providence, the hand of God in the Revolution. Eyewitness accounts talk about these things, and there are lots of stories throughout the ages, throughout the years, of our efforts in a lot of ways, and the hand of God being there. It's important for us to look back to where we began, to why Americans take up arms from time to time. Woodrow Wilson in the early 1900s made an interesting point. Wilson said this: "We're trying to do a futile thing if we do not know where we came from or what we've been about. America was born a Christian nation. America was born to exemplify those elements of righteousness which are derived from the revelation of Holy Scripture. We're experiencing in our day and time a rewriting of American history. There are people that want to write God out of the foundations of this country, want to get rid of God's influence in any way, shape, or form from the history of this country. And as a result of that, we, I think, need to go back and remember the realities of how it began. The Founding Fathers were not sitting in a pub one day in Philadelphia or New York City. And since it's in a pub, Samuel Adams didn't lean over and say, "Hey guys, why don't we start our own country? Wouldn't that be a kick? Oh yeah, Sam, that's a great idea. Let's see if we can rouse the people, and we'll just start our own country." That's not how it happened. A generation or so before the Founding Fathers drew their line in the sand with King George, the preachers of that era began searching the Scriptures. And they found out that there are certain unalienable rights. These are rights that God gives to people, not the King of England. They started finding out that governments are set up not to give rights to people, but to protect the rights that God gives to people. And so they preached that message. And people like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and Samuel Adams and John Adams and Benjamin Rush and many of the founders listened to the preaching, and they said, "That's right." And they began, because of the tyranny of the King of England, they began dialoguing with the Crown about the issues that they had, the tyrannical issues that the king was doing to the colonies. They began a dialogue until push came to shove and the British fired on American citizens and the war started. The founders had in their mind the idea of establishing a country that was more of an ideal than it was about turf. I like the statement that Colin Powell made back in, I believe it was, 2003. Powell was at a economic forum in Switzerland. And as Secretary of State, you will remember the basic comment that he made. They were talking about the military might of America and so on, and how we like to use the military instead of diplomacy and various things. And Powell pointed out that for many years we've sent our young men and women into harm's way on behalf of the cause of America. And he said we've asked for nothing except enough ground to bury them in, and otherwise we've returned home to seek our own lives in peace. In other words, America hasn't been about extending the empire. That's what Great Britain did. We're not about taking over the world. America's about an ideal that's based on Scripture, that's based on God Himself. Let me read a little bit. My favorite document of those early days is the Declaration of Independence. I'm going to read some excerpts from the Declaration. I would encourage you, especially this Memorial Day, and then as we approach July 4th, go back and read and reread the Declaration. It's fabulous. Let me begin. Congress, July 4, 1776. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinion of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impelled them to the separation. We're going to tell you, King, why we're breaking ties with you. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, not evolved, created equal. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. And then they go on and they list about 20 or 21 grievances that they have against the king. Let me read the last paragraph, my favorite part. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, we have the full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all the other acts and things which independent states may of right do. My favorite line, the very last line of the Declaration. And for the support of this declaration, with firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And then they signed the declaration. And you'll remember that John Hancock signed his name in big letters so that the king wouldn't have to wear his glasses to see it. Those men were guilty of treason against the King of England. Benjamin Franklin said, we've got to hang together or we'll assuredly hang separately. They put their lives literally on the line, and we sit here and bask in the liberties for which they gave their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor. Most of the men that signed the Declaration of Independence wound up poor because they gave all of their money to the cause. Not only that, there were farmers and shopkeepers and preachers and doctors and lawyers who put off their civilian garb and put on the uniform of the Continental Army and went to battle, stepped on the battlefield to fight for liberty. Sometimes push comes to shove. Sometimes you have to defend your life. And they went willingly. We remember. We remember them laying down their lives in those places so that you and I could have liberty today. Americans throughout the years have laid down their lives for liberty, for ours and for the liberty of others. You see, America's an ideal. It's not turf. And so there are places where people are oppressed, and Americans go to fight for liberty for people who may not be able to do that for themselves. America was established on godly principles. America was established as an ideal based on those principles. Have we been perfect? No. We've committed some atrocities in America. We sent slave ships from New England down into Africa and brought slaves to America, particularly in the South. That was wrong. But because of Christian principles, that slave trade was abolished. We've done some bad things to American Indians because of Christian principle. Things are attempted to be corrected. We've done other things throughout the history of America, but the overriding principles are principles of Christianity. Wilson was right. We were created to be a Christian nation, and that the hand of God was to be in the lives, in the heart of American people. Psalm 33 says, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord." Deuteronomy chapter 8, Moses is giving instructions to the Hebrews who are about to go into the promised land. A generation has died off, and now the next generation is going to go in. Listen to some of the things he tells them. "When you've eaten and are satisfied, you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you." And on down, he says, "Otherwise, you may say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hand made me this wealth." Does that sound remotely familiar to the world in which we live? Back then, when we started, we said we're dependent on God and his providence. What are we saying today? We got to do this. Look at how good we have been. Look at the wealth we have created. We're not much different, are we? Then he says, "It shall come about if you ever forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I testify against you today that you will surely perish." America's intent was to kind of be like the nation of Israel, kind of be a light to the world where the name of Jesus was exalted and where freedoms could come because the hand of God was with people, with the nation. Over time, we've ebbed and flowed with that ideal. Sometimes we've been right on target with it, and sometimes we've been off. Sometimes we give credit to ourselves instead of credit to God, but the results are the same. You ever wondered why we could win the revolution? Why was it that this ragtag band of former shopkeepers and preachers and teachers and civilians could put on the uniform and ultimately defeat the most powerful army in the world? The people that were there said it was the providence of God. It wasn't our greatness. We weren't that good an army, but we won the victory in the end. I want to tell you two stories. Two stories that illustrate the providence of God in the history of the Revolution, and we can see in other cases how God has worked in the nation. August the 27th, 1776. British General Howe had trapped the American forces on Long Island. Washington and his 8,000 troops had been there. General Howe comes onto the island, and Washington and his troops are rightfully afraid. He's outnumbered, he's outgunned. The British Army is far superior in skill than the Americans. This is about a month after we've declared our independence from Great Britain. We're not ready, really, to do an all-out battle. So Washington says it's going to be better for us to retreat and fight another day than to stay here and die and lose. So the night falls. Howe had decided that the next morning he's going to send his troops against Washington. During the night, Washington calls for ships and boats and all kinds of vessels to come and ferry his men across the river to mainland New York. Dawn comes. While Washington had taken most of his troops off, there were still a number of troops left, and they were frightened for their safety because Howe was about to attack. Major Benjamin Talmadge was Washington's chief intelligence officer. Let me read to you what he said about that day. At the dawn of the next day, those of us who remained in the trenches became very anxious for our own safety. At this time, a very dense fog began to rise out of the river, and it seemed to settle in a peculiar manner over both encampments. I recollect this peculiar providential occurrence perfectly well. So dense was the atmosphere that I could scarcely discern a man 6 yards distant. In the midst of the fog, Washington was able to evacuate all the rest of his troops. And when the fog lifted and Howe was ready to attack, there were no American soldiers to fight. And the British never had that opportunity again. By the way, a little time out. If you have the time and the inclination, get some of the older books about George Washington and read about his life. Modern books, some of the modern books have rewritten some things about Washington. But go back and get some of those older books. I've got a couple in my library. You will be fascinated with the character and the quality of George Washington and some of the providential events that happened in his life that actually put him in the position of being our commander of our army and then later our president. Second story I want to tell you. Before I go. Psalm 33, verse 16. No king is saved by the size of his army. No warrior escapes by his great strength. The people of the Continental Army said, God saved the army that day. Second story, Yorktown, Virginia. This is the final major battle of the war. And this is the defeat of Cornwallis at Yorktown, the surrender, and like I said, the last of the big battles. Heard that there was a guide who was taking tourists on a tour through Yorktown's battlefield. I've not been there yet. The guide said to the tourists, this is a major battle, last major battle, and on and on and on. Then he said there are 3 reasons why we won that battle. Number 1, George Washington was brilliant as he brought the French in to help us fight against the British. Number 2, there was dissension among the British ranks, and it caused division within the army, and it weakened the army, and they couldn't recover from it, and so Washington would whip them. And he said the number 3 reason, he said just plain luck. Let me tell you what really happened. Cornwallis chose Yorktown because the field was good for battle. And not too far away from the battlefield, there was a place at the James River that was kind of narrow. And if he needed to evacuate his troops, Cornwallis could take them across the James River quickly. Washington came up from the south. Cornwallis heard that he was coming, and so he sent for reinforcements from New York. They arrived late. Wonder why? Maybe Providence? They arrived late. And so when Washington got there, the American army began pummeling Cornwallis and the British. We'd gotten pretty good at battle by the end of the war. And we were pummeling Great Britain's army. So Cornwallis said, we're going to evacuate, we'll get across the James River, and he sent boats and a group of soldiers across the river. The first wave made it just fine. But then something special happened. A hurricane-force wind came up and blew against those boats, and they could not come back across the river to retrieve more troops. And as a result, Washington defeats Cornwallis. On November 15th, 1781, Washington wrote to Tom McKean, who was the president of the Continental Congress. And he said, I take particular pleasure in acknowledging that the interposing hand of heaven in various instances of the preparation for this operation has been most conspicuous and remarkable. Whether it was Long Island or whether it was Yorktown, the people that were there said it was the hand of God that rescued, that saved, that took care of the incident. They were there. They saw things we only read about. They believed in the hand of God protecting them in those instances. God's hand is intended to be with us throughout history. Not just as Americans, I'm talking about all man. God intends for all of us to walk with Him. God intends for all of us to become like Him, to bear His image in this world. And as you and I reflect back on those people who laid down their lives literally for us, they did it for an ideal of a Christian nation founded on the properties and principles of God and His Word. You can read about that throughout the Declaration. But you can also read the principles of the Bible in the Constitution. God's not mentioned in the Constitution, but the principles are there. Those men put together a Constitution, and those that were there said it was like an inspired document, the way it all fell together. God's hand has been with this country in a lot of ways, and it reminds me of the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is not about turf. The kingdom of heaven is about ideals. Jesus said, the kingdom is in your midst, it's within you. It's not turf. It's about living up to the principles of God and His Word. So we've looked at some of the providential intervention of God in the history of our nation. Some will downplay it, others will admire it. We kind of see what we want to see at times. But when we learn our history, we can appreciate the hand of God in the life of the nation. But when we become prosperous, if we're not careful, we can forget the hand of God and scoff at His intervention. We say to God, because we have gotten so wealthy and so uppity at times, we say to God, keep your commandments off our courtroom walls. Even though the Supreme Court has the Ten Commandments engraved on it, we don't want that there. We don't want prayer in our schools. We don't want Bible reading in public places. We don't want acknowledgement of God anymore, right? Because we're prosperous, we've got everything going our way. Really? You think maybe the shutdown is a wake-up call to us to remember that we are not capable on our own? That there are certain things that you and I need to trust with our God, not with ourselves. We're at a crossroads, I believe, as a nation. Are we going to follow the God who created us, or are we going to create gods to follow? What are we going to do as a people? We can look back and see the hand of God in the life of the nation. And we can look forward and hopefully see the hand of God in the life of the nation again. A lot of that depends on us. How we're going to behave, what we're going to do, who we're going to trust. Do we trust God or do we trust somebody else, something else? A lot of gods in America that are falling right now. But our God stands. Our opportunity is to walk with Him. How do you change the culture of a nation? You do it one person at a time. Starts with me. I change my perspective, you change your perspective, and we encourage others to look to God. One by one person at a time, a culture changes, a nation changes. In those early days of the revolution, it was there because there was a culture who looked to God. Hopefully we will as well. This morning we're going to offer an invitation, and if you need to respond, we're going to encourage you to come. If you want to put Christ on in baptism, or if you need prayers for some reason, we want to encourage you to come forward this morning. Let's stand, let's sing, and if you have a need,